Shadows dance across the gold-veined marble of the Louvre, while the scent of roasted venison and heavy Malmsey wine hangs in the humid air. Catherine de Medici watches from the high table, her dark eyes reflecting the flicker of 200 beeswax candles. Across the hall, a powerful duke lifts a jeweled chalice to his lips, laughing at a whispered joke before taking a deep, greedy swallow. Suddenly, his laughter turns into a wet, rattling gasp that echoes against the vaulted ceiling. His fingers claw at the silk tablecloth, dragging a silver platter of fruit onto the floor with a deafening crash. No one moves as the Duke's face turns a bruised shade of purple. The Queen Mother remains perfectly still, sipping her own untainted wine in silence. The road to this blood-stained banquet begins in 1519 among the opulent banks and bitter rivalries of Florence. Catherine enters a world that has already decided her fate as the last legitimate heir of the legendary Medici line. By the age of 11, she is known as the Little Duchess, an orphan whose parents died within weeks of her birth. While the Renaissance blooms with art, the political landscape is a swamp of shifting alliances and sudden betrayals between popes and kings. Catherine lives through the terrifying siege of 1527, trapped inside a convent while angry mobs scream for her blood outside. These early years of fear and isolation forge a mind that views human life as a cold, expendable currency. In 1533, the 14th year of her life becomes a pivot point for the entire French kingdom. Pope Clement VII negotiates a marriage contract that sends the Italian orphan across the sea to wed Henry, the second son of King Francis. Catherine arrives in Marseille with a fleet of galleys and a massive dowry of gold, pearls, and the finest Italian craftsmen. The French court sneers at her merchant blood, calling her the shopkeeper's daughter, while she walks through palace halls lined with hostile nobles. She says nothing, hiding her sharp intellect behind a mask of humble submission. Beneath her heavy brocade gowns, she carries secrets from the Florentine apothecaries, distillations of arsenic and hemlock that will eventually become her most trusted advisors. For over a decade, Catherine endures the public humiliation of a barren marriage, while her husband dotes on his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. The power dynamics of the court are a constant pressure, a slow, crushing weight that forces Catherine to seek influence through unconventional means. She builds a secret network of informants and alchemists, turning her private chambers into a laboratory of hidden chemical reactions. The smell of sulfur and boiling herbs mingles with the expensive musk of her perfumes as she learns to identify the subtle differences between natural fever and cold, calculated poison. While the French crown expands its borders through traditional warfare, Catherine prepares a different kind of arsenal. She understands that a single drop in a glass is more efficient than 10,000 marching soldiers. The sudden death of King Francis in 1547 moves Catherine one step closer to the ultimate seat of power. Her husband Henry ascends the throne, yet Catherine remains a ghost in her own palace, overshadowed by the beauty and political influence of the king's mistress. She watches the rise of the powerful House of Guise, a fanatical Catholic family that threatens to swallow the influence of the monarchy itself. The religious landscape of France is fracturing as the Protestant Huguenots gain strength in the southern provinces, creating a volatile atmosphere of hatred and suspicion. Catherine monitors the rising tension like a chemist watching a boiling beaker, waiting for the exact moment to intervene. She knows that in a kingdom of wolves, the lamb must learn to bite. Disaster strikes during a celebration of peace in 1559, transforming Catherine from a sidelined wife into a grieving regent. During a celebratory joust, a splintered wooden lance pierces the golden visor of King Henry, driving a jagged shard of oak deep into his skull. Catherine watches from the royal box as the most powerful man in France collapses into the dust of the tournament field. For 10 agonizing days, she listens to his muffled screams behind closed doors while surgeons hopelessly probe the suppurating wound. When the king finally dies, Catherine dons the black veil of perpetual mourning, a garment she will never remove for the next 30 years. She is now the mother of a frail young king, and the guardian of a dying dynasty. The treasury is empty, and the air is thick with the smell of impending civil war as Catherine assumes control of the government. Her 3 sons are sickly, weak, and easily manipulated by the ambitious men who circle the throne like vultures. To maintain the fragile stability of France, Catherine creates her own personal spy ring, known to history as the Flying Squadron. She recruits 80 beautiful and intelligent noblewomen, training them to extract secrets from powerful men during the long, wine-soaked nights of the court. While the nobles argue over scripture and territory, Catherine's women gather the intelligence she needs to play her enemies against one another. Every whispered confession and stolen letter flows back to Catherine's desk, giving her a godlike view of every secret conspiracy. By the early 1560s, the art of the political murder becomes a refined tool in Catherine's struggle for survival. Rumors begin to circulate about her cabinet of curiosities, a collection of carved wooden boxes filled with lethal Italian ointments and powders. She understands that the most effective weapon is one that leaves no visible mark on the skin and no evidence for the doctors to find. When a rival becomes too powerful or a diplomat becomes too stubborn, they often succumb to a sudden, inexplicable illness after receiving a gift from the Queen Mother. A pair of scented leather gloves or a beautifully bound book can carry enough toxin to seep through the pores and shut down a human heart within 48 hours of contact. The conflict between the Catholic Guise family and the Protestant Bourbons escalates into a series of bloody wars that tear the French countryside apart. Catherine attempts to broker peace through a series of tactical marriages and religious edicts, but the hatred on both sides is too deep for ink to heal. She watches as her second son, Charles IX, struggles with bouts of madness and physical frailty under the immense pressure of the crown. The atmosphere in Paris is a suffocating mixture of religious fervor and political paranoia, where a single wrong word can lead to a riot. Catherine realizes that her policy of balance is failing, and the survival of her family now requires a decisive, brutal action to remove the leaders of the rebellion forever. The most controversial moment of her long reign arrives in August of 1572, during the wedding festivities of her daughter. Catherine has invited the entire Protestant nobility to Paris, a move designed to trap her enemies within the walls of the city. The heat of the summer is unbearable, and the tension in the streets feels like a tightly wound spring ready to snap. Catherine spends the night of August 23rd in a series of frantic meetings with her son, convincing him that a preemptive strike is the only way to prevent a coup. She describes the imminent danger of a Huguenot uprising until the young king finally screams for them to kill them all so that none remain to reproach him. The bell of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois tolls through the humid night, acting as a grim signal for the most infamous massacre in the history of France. Catherine stands by the window of the Louvre, listening to the sudden eruption of gunfire and the screams of men being dragged from their beds. The slaughter spreads from the noble houses into the narrow, winding alleys of Paris, where the Catholic mobs begin a systematic extermination of their neighbors. Thousands of bodies are thrown into the Seine River until the water turns a dark, viscous red and the current is choked with the dead. Catherine watches the carnage with a cold, detached expression, knowing that the blood on her hands is the price of keeping her sons on the throne for another decade. The fallout from the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre transforms Catherine into the legendary Black Queen, a figure of pure villainy in the eyes of Protestant Europe. Writers and poets describe her as a heartless sorceress who uses the dark arts and Italian chemistry to corrupt the natural order of the kingdom. She ignores the insults, focusing instead on the practical reality of holding together a nation that is rapidly slipping into total anarchy. Her third son, Henry III, eventually takes the throne, but he is a man of erratic passions and expensive tastes who further destabilizes the monarchy. Catherine spends her final years traveling across the war-torn provinces, negotiating with rebels and trying to salvage the reputation of a dynasty that is running out of heirs. The smell of damp stone and stale incense fills her private oratory as Catherine's health begins to fail in the winter of 1589. She is 70 years old, an incredible age for a woman who has spent her life breathing the toxic air of chemical experiments and political betrayal. News reaches her that her son has ordered the assassination of the Duke of Guise, a move that triggers a final massive revolt in the city of Paris. Catherine realizes that the system of control she spent 50 years building is finally collapsing under the weight of her son's incompetence. She lies in her bed at the Château de Blois, watching the winter snow fall outside while the sound of distant drums signals the end of the Valois line. Catherine dies in January, just days before her son is stabbed by a fanatic monk, leaving the throne of France to her son-in-law, Henry of Navarre. The Italian shopkeeper's daughter, who arrived with nothing but a dowry and a box of poisons, leaves behind a legacy that will haunt Europe for centuries. She transformed the role of the queen from a decorative figure into a central, terrifying engine of state security and chemical espionage. Her innovations in the use of toxins and intelligence gathering created the blueprint for the absolute monarchies of the next 200 years. While history remembers her as a monster, Catherine viewed herself as a mother who did the unthinkable to ensure that her children did not perish in the flames of the Renaissance. The transition of power to Henry IV marks the end of the bloody religious wars and the beginning of a new, unified France. Catherine's surviving influence is visible in the architecture of the city and the sophisticated bureaucracy that now manages the affairs of the sprawling kingdom. The perfumers of Paris, originally brought from Florence at Catherine's request, continue to thrive, though their products are now used more for luxury than for lethal intent. Deep in the archives of the Vatican and the royal libraries, secret journals remain filled with the chemical formulas and political strategies that Catherine used to outmaneuver the most powerful men of her age. The dark reputation of the Medici name becomes synonymous with a style of governance where the sharpest weapon is often invisible. We must look closer at the individual victims of Catherine's subtle chemical warfare to understand the sheer precision of her deadly political art. Consider the death of Jeanne d'Albret, the Queen of Navarre, and a leader of the Huguenot cause who dies suddenly in 1572. After purchasing a pair of exquisitely crafted Italian leather gloves, the Protestant queen is seized by a violent fever that kills her in less than 5 days. While the official report blames a natural ailment, the common people whisper that the leather was treated with a deadly extract of crushed belladonna and concentrated mercury. Catherine offers her public condolences with a face of stone, knowing that a major obstacle to her daughter's marriage has been removed without firing a single shot of lead. The court of the Renaissance is a theater where every gesture is a signal and every meal is a potential execution. Catherine introduces the fork to the French table, a sophisticated tool from Italy that changes the way the nobility interacts with their food and each other. Yet even as she refines the manners of the elite, she maintains a close relationship with the most dangerous alchemists and astrologers of the age. Nostradamus and Cosimo Ruggieri are frequent guests in her private chambers, providing her with prophecies and chemical compounds that blur the line between science and the supernatural. The flickering torchlight in these secret rooms illuminates a queen who is both a patron of the arts and a master of the darkest aspects of human nature. The macro-scale shifts of European power are often decided by the micro-scale movements of a single poisoned needle or a contaminated letter. Catherine understands that the Spanish Empire and the English crown are watching France like scavengers, waiting for the monarchy to show a single moment of true weakness. She balances the interests of the Pope with the demands of the French nobility, using her Italian heritage as both a shield and a source of unique, hidden power. The sheer volume of silver and gold she spends on her intelligence network ensures that no conspiracy can take root without her eventually hearing the first whispers of betrayal. She is a woman trapped in a male world, using the only weapons that society allows her to master with absolute efficiency. The scent of almond and bitter cherry often signals the presence of cyanide, a substance that Catherine's apothecaries learned to mask with the heavy spices of the Mediterranean. She trains her servants to watch for the slightest change in a guest's complexion or the sudden trembling of a hand during a toast. The Palace of the Louvre becomes a house of mirrors where no one is truly safe and everyone is a potential target for the Queen Mother's silent wrath. Even her own children are not entirely free from the suffocating grip of her paranoia and her constant need for absolute control over the royal line. The psychological weight of living under such constant surveillance drives many of the young nobles into fits of madness or desperate, ill-fated rebellions. As we zoom out to see the ruins of the Valois dynasty, we find a kingdom that was saved from total destruction at the cost of its moral soul. Catherine de Medici did not create the hatred that fueled the religious wars, but she mastered the art of using that hatred to sustain her own power. Her legacy is written in the blood of the massacre and the ink of the secret treaties that define the borders of modern-day France. She remains one of the most polarizing figures in human history, a woman who was called a saint by her supporters and a demon by those she destroyed. The shadows she cast over the palaces of Europe still linger in the dark corners where power and poison meet. The final candle flickers out in the royal bedchamber as the reign of the Black Queen passes into the realm of legend and historical debate. The smell of burnt wax and the cold draft from the window are the only things that remain of the woman who held the fate of France in her hands. Her recipes for death and her strategies for survival are buried beneath centuries of royal records and the shifting sands of political ideology. Yet, the fear she inspired and the innovations she brought to the art of governance continue to echo through the corridors of power in every age. Catherine de Medici was the queen who understood that true dominance is not found in the roar of the crowd, but in the silence of the grave.